Hi everyone, welcome to this week's video. We finally had our first proper frost of the year. It's Monday the 22nd of November and the dahlias have finally given in for the year. This is a full 2 months after our first frost last year, so it's been the latest one that I have ever known since I started growing flowers. And it's now time to lift the dahlias and to get them stored for winter, and I'll show you how I do this. So this is what the dahlia bed looks like when it's newly frosted, and you can leave the dahlias in until you've had a couple of good frosts, and this will help prepare the tubers for storage over the winter. I gotta cut them all back now so that their stems are only a couple of inches away from the ground, and then they will be prepped and ready for lifting with the fork. Any stakes I will take out that have been supporting the dahlias, and I'll store them away in the sheds for the winter time, and then I'll be able to reuse them next year. So the first thing I'm going to do this morning is I'm going to take my garden scissors here and I'm going to go down the bed of dahlias, and I'm going to remove all the tatty foliage that's now starting to die back. They should all be labelled, so when I lift them I should be able to put the label in with them and know which tuber I am storing for next year. And the other thing you're going to need is you're going to need your garden fork so that you can carefully lift those dahlias out of the soil. So with my dahlia here, it's still got a stake in it, so I'm just going to gently remove the stake. And then I'm going to just take back the stems of the leaves to an inch or so above ground level, and these stems I'm going to put on the compost heap. If you live in mild areas, you can leave your dahlias in the ground over the winter. Just provide them with a good mulch and they'll come away again for you in the spring. But as I live in an area in Scotland here where we get very wet winters and we get a lot of ice and snow, my tubers don't survive, so I have to lift them. And as you can see here, it's still got its label, so that's water lily white, so that will be coming out when I lift that tuber, and I'll store them together. And I'm just going to work my way down the bed now, prepping all the dahlias so they're ready to lift with the fork. So that's the dahlias all with their foliage chopped off now, ready to lift. So you can see that I've just left a few inches above the soil so I can see where the dahlias are, and I can lift them up with a fork. And this is all the foliage that I have cut off of the dahlias, and that will need to be taken down in the wheelbarrow to the compost heap and chopped into smaller pieces so that it can decompose at a good rate. Some of the dahlia stalks are quite long and some quite thick, so you do want to chop them down quite small if you're putting them on the compost heap. If you were letting them stay in the ground at this stage in a milder area, you would need to put a good few inches of mulch on top just to keep the tubers from rotting over the winter time. But we're going to get the fork out now and we're going to start lifting these, and then they're going to have to dry off for a couple of weeks before I wrap them up and store them. So to lift your dahlia, take your fork, place it in the soil, not too close to the dahlia so that you don't damage the tubers underneath the soil, and then just press down gently with your foot and ease round the dahlia there like that. And then just move your fork again, take it out and put it in at a different angle, and then do the same thing and gently work on the soil round about the dahlia until you can feel like it is moving, and then you can lift it free nice and gently. There we go, you can see it coming up there. So let's have a look if it's going to come out. There we are, that dahlia is nice and free now, and we can remove what soil we need to round about it. And go on to the next one. You can see it easing up there. There is quite a lot of soil remaining around the tubers. So you want to see if you can ease any of this off gently. And then the next stage is that I'll take it up to the house and I'll let it dry on some newspaper in my cool workroom for a couple of weeks. I don't want to put it in the greenhouse for them to dry because that at the moment is too cold now. Now that the frosts have come, the overnight temperatures would mean it was far too cool and I could risk losing the tubers to frost. And likewise, I don't want to leave them outside under cover to dry because that will be too cold for them as well. So I just take them into an undercover area I have in the house that's cool, it's not heated, and they'll dry off there really well. A lot of people wash their tubers to get rid of all the soil, clean them up, make them look nice for storing over the winter time, and that means that they can more easily see how to divide them at this time of year. I remove as much soil as I can, but I don't wash them because I don't want to run the risk of losing my tubers. And I've actually found that storing them with some of the dry soil around them once they've dried off actually helps to keep them. So just what works for me is that I don't wash my tubers. I make sure that they're nice and dry, but any soil remaining on them I think actually helps protect them over the winter time here in Scotland where I live. And I don't divide them at this time of year either. You can do that, but I find it easier to divide them in the springtime once they're starting to come back into growth again and you can see the eyes on the tubers much more easily. So I find it easier in the spring to divide them. So even though they're quite large clumps just now, I'll store them like this and then get them up in the springtime and divide them then. So we're starting to get the tubers out of the soil now. You can see some here that I've just laid on the top of the bed. So I've lifted all the dahlias and I've moved them up onto the drive up here, and I'm going to go round each one now and I'm just going to check them before taking them in for any rotten parts, cut away any rotten bits and just check that the tubers that I'm going to store over the winter are firm and healthy ones. And I've also just walked down the bed as well that I've been removing them from, just to check that I haven't missed any, and I'd missed one, so I've just dug that out just now as well. So it's always worth checking that you've got the whole lot out. So this one here is nice and healthy. It's got lots of nice firm tubers on it, and it looks like it's going to be a good one to store. This one here, you can see that there are some rotten parts on some of the tubers there, so I'm going to need to cut that away and just leave the healthy tubers behind. So the next stage, now that my dahlia tubers are all dry, is to wrap them up and store them away for the winter time. And lots of people do this in a lot of different ways. Some people like to put their dahlia tubers in amongst dry compost in crates or boxes. Some people like to put them in wood shavings. Some people like to put them in vermiculite. Some people like to wrap them in newspaper. Everybody does different things. And what I choose to do is a little bit of a mixture of what I've learned from different people and what's worked for me over the last few years. And what I like to do is I like to wrap them into cling film and then wrap them into newspaper and put them into cardboard boxes. And this has worked really well for me, and I use the cling film for a variety of different reasons. One of the reasons I like it is because you can wrap each individual tuber and then they're protected from the other. So if you put them in a box together, one tuber is not going to be rubbing up against each other, and therefore if one rots, it's not going to affect the next one and make that rot as well. And if you put them into the cling film and you wrap them in this and they're all sealed nicely, then you don't have to check them over the winter either. They should be fine. You should find that you don't get any rotting if you're lucky, and if you have got one that's rotting, again, it's not going to affect the others in the box. The problem that I've had with using the cling film is that it's not very environmentally friendly. So this year I'm really pleased to have found some cling film that is biodegradable, and it comes from Lakeland Plastics. So that has been really good. I feel much better about using that now. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to wrap my tubers in the cling film. After I've checked them, I'll make sure that they're all nice and dry, that there's no dampness about them, make sure that there's no rotten bits. If there's a rotten bit on a tuber, I'll make sure that I've cut that away so that all the tubers are nice and healthy. And if there's any exposed open cuts, I will dust them with some yellow sulfur powder, and that just helps to prevent any fungal infections and helps to seal up the cut. So I've got one of my tubers here, and once I have got them inside to dry them off, like I mentioned before, I don't actually hose these down. I don't remove all the soil from them. I really feel that the dry soil, once it's dried on, is a nice protection for them, and that if I hose them down in the garden, I don't think with my environment where it's cold and damp in Peebles that they would dry out properly. I think that that would lead to a lot more loss of tubers for me, because they wouldn't dry out. I'd wrap them up, they'd never be bone dry, and they'd be more likely to rot away over the winter time. So this one is nice and dry, and I've checked it round. I've made sure that it's nice and healthy, and I can then wrap it up. I've removed any long straggly roots because you don't need them. What you need is just the nice healthy tubers, so you can get rid, trim off any excess roots that are on the bottom as well. So I've just cut off a length of my compostable cling film here. So it's larger than the tuber, and I have laid it on top of a piece of newspaper. And I'm going to take my tuber, which I've got here, and just place it into the middle of the cling film. And then I'm going to simply take it over the top like that, one way, over the top the other way. And that's got it wrapped nicely that way, but we're going to now need another piece of cling film so that we can just pop the tuber in the other direction so that it's completely wrapped up from all sides. So I'll just move that over there just now. And then I'll just make sure that's all folded round nicely. And then I've just got 2 sheets of newspaper here, so I've laid one underneath one way, and then I've laid the other piece of newspaper over the top the other way. And I will take my tuber that I've got there, and then I'm going to take the plant label so that we know which dahlia tuber this is, and I'm just going to put that in with it. And then I'm going to do the same as I did with the cling film. I'm just going to put the paper over one way, put the paper over the other way, and then fold in the other 2 sides as well. So I've folded them over like that, and then I'm just going to tuck the ends under. So I've got my dahlia tuber all wrapped up now, and what I'm going to do next is I'm just going to put it into a cardboard box for the winter time. I'm going to do the same thing with lots more tubers, so individually wrapping them in cling film, putting the plant label in with them and wrapping them in newspaper, and then I'm going to store them side by side in the box. And because they are wrapped in the cling film and then the newspaper, they won't affect each other in the box, so if one should rot, it shouldn't affect the others there. And then this box is going to be stored in a frost-free place for the winter time. So that could be a cellar or a basement or a garage or an unheated workroom, wherever you have got that's not heated but is not going to get frost in it. And then you can take them out in the springtime, unwrap them, and you should start to see some eyes on them, and you'll be able to plant up your tubers, and we'll have a look back in the spring and see what they're looking like then. So my next dahlia tuber here, it is still got a lot of these roots on it, as you can see here, and we don't need to be keeping all these roots. You can just trim them away so that you have got the main tuber left. So I'm going to do that just now. So I've just got a bucket here. I'm going to take my scissors and just trim off all those excess roots, and then I'll show you what it looks like in a second. So that's my dahlia tuber that's trimmed now with all its roots. It's still got quite a lot of soil, as you can see around it, but this soil is not damp. It is dry from having been dried out in the cold workroom over the last couple of weeks. So I'm going to wrap that up in its cling film and its newspaper as well, and put it in the box with its label. I'm really glad that I have lifted my dahlias to store them over the winter, and I've done it in the nick of time as well. The frost didn't come throughout November for a long time this year, really late. I've never ever stored my dahlias this late before. But in the last week, we've really had all sorts of weather. We've had temperatures well below freezing. We've had a big storm. We have had snow a couple of different times. And we have had some very, very prolonged heavy rainfall as well. And all these conditions are just not any good for storing your dahlias outside in the beds. I would have probably lost the vast majority even within the last week with the weather that we've been having. So it really does depend on where you live, what you want to do. If you're in an area where you're not going to get this prolonged wet rain in winter, where you're not going to get these really freezing temperatures and it's much milder, then you can just add a few good inches of mulch to the tops of your beds and your dahlias should hopefully be fine. But where I live in Scotland, then it just was too big a risk. I would probably lose all my dahlias. And every year that I've wrapped them in my cling film and my newspaper and put them in the cardboard boxes, I haven't lost a dahlia. I have managed to get them all through the winters. So I know this method works really well for me, but I also understand that there are lots of other methods that different gardeners use which were equally successful for them, such as putting them in the crates with the dry compost or the vermiculite or your wood shaving. So it's whatever works for you. Find a method that works for you within your conditions over the winter time, and hopefully you'll get your dahlias through too. And we'll have a look at them in the springtime and see what they're looking like. Have a look for those eyes and start potting them up and seeing what beautiful flowers we can get next year.